The letter was a final, brutal severance, its crisp paper and formal type a cruel contrast to the desperate hope that had carried Elara across a continent. It was not from the man who had promised her a new life, but from his mother, coldly informing her that her services would not be required, as her son had married the local banker's daughter. The final sentence was a splash of ice water. "We trust you can find your own way back." But there was no way back. The crowded train station in Silver Pine, Montana, swirled around her, a blur of joyful reunions and purposeful strides, while she stood utterly still, a statue of despair with a single, worn carpet bag at her feet. She was a ghost already, a woman erased before she had even begun. The money sewn into the hem of her skirt was gone, spent on the last leg of the journey. The address she had clutched for weeks was worthless. Elara's world, which had already been small and fragile, shattered completely there on the dusty platform. She had thought leaving the smog-choked tenements of London was her escape. An orphan, passed between indifferent relatives until she was old enough to work in a suffocating factory, she had answered the advertisement with a trembling hand. Mr. Thomas Clark, a widower from Montana, had written of clean air, open land, and a quiet need for companionship. To Elara, his words had painted a picture of a home, the one thing she had never known. She had woven a fragile fantasy of gratitude and usefulness, of earning a place at a hearth. Now, that fantasy was ash. The station master's sympathetic glance felt like pity, which was worse than scorn. "Clark?" he'd said, scratching his head. "Thomas Clark? Yeah, he lives out the old mill road." But he trailed off, his eyes dropping to her threadbare gloves. "Might not be the welcome you're expectin', miss." With nowhere else to go, her pride the only currency she had left, she began the long walk. The vastness of the Montana sky was terrifying in its indifference. It took hours, the sun beating down on her dark wool dress, a garment chosen for practicality, not for a cross-country trek. Her feet ached in her worn boots. By the time a faded mailbox marked Clark came into view, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple that seemed to mock her inner turmoil. The house was not what she'd imagined. It was a small, weathered homestead, its porch sagging, the yard untended. It spoke not of prosperity, but of a struggle as deep as her own. Her knock was a timid whisper against the solid wood. The door opened to reveal a man whose face was a landscape of grief. Thomas Clark was tall and broad-shouldered, but he seemed to stoop under an invisible weight. His eyes, a tired blue, held no warmth, only a weary exhaustion. "Yes." His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. Elara's own voice failed her. She simply held out the letter, her hand trembling. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion, then darkening in dawning comprehension as he read. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "My mother," he said, the words clipped and heavy with a familiar frustration. "She had no right. I told her I'd changed my mind. That I couldn't." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I'm sorry for your trouble, miss. But as you can see, this is no place for you." He began to close the door, a final, definitive gesture of rejection. Elara felt the last of her strength dissolve. She was truly, completely alone. But as the door narrowed, a small figure darted from the shadows inside and clutched the man's leg. A little girl, no more than 5, with wide, solemn eyes the color of the twilight sky and a tumble of honey-blonde curls. She stared at Elara with an intensity that was unnerving. Thomas sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Go on inside, Lily." But the child didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on Elara's face, tracing the tracks of tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. The little girl then let go of her father's leg, took a single, hesitant step forward, and stretched out a tiny hand. She didn't touch Elara, but her whisper was so clear it seemed to silence the evening crickets. "Papa said an angel was coming. Are you her?" The child's voice was a fragile thread of sound. Then, with a hope so raw it cracked Elara's heart clean open, she whispered, "Can you be my mommy?" The world stopped. Thomas stiffened, his face a mask of pain. Elara, who had received a lifetime of rejection, looked down into the little girl's eyes and saw not pity, not obligation, but a pure, desperate need that mirrored her own. It was the first time anyone had ever looked at her and seen something wanted. Thomas Clark stood frozen, his daughter's question hanging in the air between them, a landmine of shared grief. His wife, Sarah, had been gone for 2 years, but the pain in his eyes was as fresh as yesterday. Lily's innocent words were a wrenching reminder of all they had lost. His first instinct was to shut it down, to protect them both from the inevitable hurt of another loss, another person walking away from the overwhelming silence of their grief. But he looked at Elara. He saw the stark loneliness in her posture, the tremble in her hands that spoke of a journey just as arduous as his own, if in a different way. He saw the way Lily was still staring, her small hand now resting trustingly on the stranger's dusty skirt. His mother's cruel interference had stranded this woman here, as lost as he felt. A grudging sense of responsibility, the last ember of the man he used to be, flickered to life. "You'll stay the night," he said, his voice still rough but lacking its previous finality. It wasn't an invitation, it was a statement. "It's too late to be on the road. You can take Sarah's old room." The house inside was clean but barren of joy. It was a shell maintained by routine, not a home filled with life. A thin layer of dust covered the mantelpiece, and the curtains were drawn as if to keep out the light. Lily, however, became Elara's silent shadow. She didn't speak again, but her large eyes followed Elara's every move. That first night, Elara lay in the narrow bed of a woman she had never known, surrounded by the faint scent of lavender that lingered in the linens. She cried, for herself, for the hopelessness of her situation, for the little girl who had asked for a mother with the same certainty one might ask for a glass of water. The next morning, instead of being asked to leave, she found Thomas wordlessly mending a fence, his shoulders set in a stubborn line. Lily brought her a piece of toast, carefully smeared with jam. It was a silent treaty. Day bled into day, then into a week. Elara, driven by a need to be useful, to earn the crust of bread she was given, began to work. She didn't ask permission. She beat the rugs, washed the windows until they shone, and planted a few seeds she found in a shed in a small patch of earth. Her first true connection came not with Thomas, who remained a quiet, brooding presence, but with the homestead itself and the child within it. She found Lily trying to wash her own pinafore in a bucket, her small hands red and raw. Without a word, Elara knelt beside her, showed her how to soak the cloth properly, and together they hung it on the line. The simple, shared task was a language unto itself. One afternoon, she discovered a wild rose bush struggling to survive near the porch, choked by weeds. She carefully cleared around it, and days later, a single, perfect pink bloom appeared. She showed it to Lily, who touched the petals with a reverence that brought tears to Elara's eyes. Thomas watched this quiet transformation from a distance. He saw the windows gleam, smelled the stew simmering on the stove when he came in from the fields, and heard the rare, soft sound of his daughter's laughter as Elara showed her how to braid daisy chains. The relentless knot of anger and grief in his chest began, imperceptibly, to loosen. He wasn't being courted or replaced. He was being helped. One evening, he came in to find his daughter's hair neatly braided, a style Sarah had often done. The sight was a punch to his gut, but the pain was followed by an unexpected warmth. Lily looked happy. He found Elara in the kitchen, scrubbing a pot. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice quieter than usual. She stopped, her hands still in the water. "I know," she replied softly, "but a home needs tending." He was silent for a long moment. "The rose bush," he finally said. "Sarah planted that." Elara met his gaze, her own filled with a compassion that didn't feel like pity. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "It deserved to bloom." In that moment, something shifted. He wasn't looking at a mail-order bride, a stranger, or a problem. He was looking at Elara. The harvest was coming, and the air grew crisp with the promise of autumn. The Clark homestead, once a place of silent sorrow, now hummed with a gentle, purposeful energy. Elara had not tried to erase Sarah's memory. Instead, she had polished the home until it gleamed like a cherished heirloom, honoring the past while making space for the present. Thomas began to talk at supper, haltingly at first, then with more ease. He spoke of the farm, of the price of wheat, of a hawk he'd seen riding the thermals. One evening, he spoke of Sarah, not with the crushing weight of before, but with a fond sadness. He told Elara how she loved to sing while she worked, how she could never keep a vegetable garden alive, but could make any flower bloom. Elara listened, her quiet presence a balm. She, in turn, shared snippets of her own past, the grayness of London, the constant hunger, the feeling of being invisible. They were two fractured people, and in the quiet rhythm of their shared life, they began to knit each other back together. Lily was the thread that bound them. The little girl, once so silent, now chattered freely, her words weaving a new family tapestry around them. She called Elara by her name, but the way she said it, with a tone of absolute trust and possession, held the meaning of the word she had first whispered. The change was tested when Thomas's mother, Eleanor Clark, came to visit. Her buggy pulled up the drive, and she stepped out, a severe woman in a severe black dress, her eyes sharp with judgment. She had come, she said, to see how her son was faring after that unfortunate business with the interloper. She expected to find chaos and misery, proof of her righteous interference. Instead, she found a tidy home smelling of fresh bread. She found a granddaughter whose face was clean and whose eyes were bright, who proudly showed her a daisy chain. She found her son not slumped in despair, but standing taller, his gaze clear as he introduced Elara, who has been a great help to us. Eleanor was served tea in a clean cup, with a slice of apple cake Elara had made. She watched, her stern demeanor faltering, as Lily climbed into Elara's lap without a second thought, and as Elara's hand automatically came up to smooth the child's hair. She saw the way her son looked at this woman, not with the passionate love he'd had for Sarah, but with a deep, abiding respect and a fondness that was perhaps more enduring. Her own story was one of loss, a hard life that had taught her that vulnerability was a weakness to be guarded against. She had tried to protect her son from more pain by building a wall. But now she saw that Elara had not torn anything down. She had simply tended the garden that remained inside the walls, making it bloom again. As she prepared to leave, her posture was less rigid. She paused beside Elara. "It seems I may have misjudged the situation," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "My son and my granddaughter, they seem well." Elara simply nodded, offering no forgiveness, nor seeking any. She understood fear in all its forms. "They are strong people," she said. "They just needed to remember how to be." That evening, after Lily was asleep, Thomas found Elara on the porch, looking out at the star-dusted Montana sky. He stood beside her, the space between them comfortable now. "My mother approved," he said, a hint of wonder in his voice. "She was afraid for you," Elara replied. "I was afraid for me," he admitted, a profound honesty in his words. He turned to her. "I was afraid to need anyone again. But Lily, she wasn't afraid to ask for what she needed." He took a deep breath. "Elara, this began all wrong. But it feels right. Would you consider staying? Not as hired help. As my wife. For real this time." Elara looked at him, then back at the house, at the light in the window of the room that was now hers, at the wild rose bush, sleeping for the winter but ready to bloom again. She thought of the little girl inside, who had seen an angel in a desperate, lonely woman. Lily's act of compassion, a simple question born of pure need, had been the first stitch in mending all their broken pieces. It had been a small hand extended in the dark, and in grasping it, Elara had found her way home. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady and sure. "I will stay." Thomas's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together, a promise sealed not in grandeur, but in quiet understanding. They were a family built not on promises made in letters, but on kindness offered in a moment of shared brokenness, a kindness that had come full circle to make them whole. Moral of the story: the most profound healing often begins not with a grand gesture, but with a single, small act of compassion that acknowledges our shared need to be seen and wanted.